Hello, and welcome to The Mind of a Therapist, a podcast where I interview psychotherapists and helping professionals and what they're passionate about in order to provide you with messages of encouragement and hope. I'm your host, Andrew Earl. The Mind of a Therapist is sponsored by Psychological Counseling Services, healing hearts and transforming lives. Look into our intensive at pcsearl.com. In today's episode, I interview Lauren Scott. Lauren is a licensed professional counselor in Colorado. She graduated from Colorado Christian University in 2015 with a master's in counseling and then found her way to ecotherapy, where she became disillusioned with current strategies and head-based tools that left the body out of therapy. Through her ecotherapy training course in California, she discovered the tools to support the healing process already happening within her clients and being in the role of a guide and midwife rather than an expert. So without further ado, here's my interview with Lauren. All right, Lauren. Well, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for talking with me today. So I'm really excited about our conversation. I know that you've done training in ecotherapy, and I was wondering if you could start by explaining to our listeners kind of an overview of ecopsychology, and then we can get into maybe what ecotherapy looks like.
Absolutely. So the field of ecopsychology is pretty broad as far as how the research that they've done to facilitate this connection between nature and helping people to tap into mental health resources and treatment, accessing nature as a treatment modality to help people within their own psyches, and also to incorporate like activism and environmental concerns within the psychology field. So it's kind of a multi-dimensional field with a lot of different research and people doing really awesome stuff. And it's a pretty robust field. And so I definitely encourage people to look up resources and authors and all sorts of different professionals who have been involved in the field much longer than I have.
I'm curious what drew you to ecopsychology?
Absolutely. So I worked in community mental health for a couple of years. And I noticed that I was getting just exhausted and compassion fatigue and burned out. And I was really considering leaving the field. And I, within the process of my work, I would take clients outside and we would just go for walks. The place where I worked had a park really close by. And I started to notice that like my clients were really benefiting from being outside and doing more of like a walk and talk style of therapy, but that I was also much more engaged and it felt less draining to me. And so I started doing research on the internet, as you will. And I at first was looking into more of like the youth like outdoor models, like, you know, going on like the quests and kind of doing treatment for at-risk populations. And that didn't really like feel right, but I happened to find a program out of California called Wilderness Reflections, and they introduced me to the whole field of ecotherapy and ecopsychology. And I just knew, I just knew that it was calling me. And I had probably, you know, within the span of an 8-day training, I really was able to reconnect with my passion and my purpose for
Mm.
why I became a therapist, and the power of um, really accessing nature as a resource, but building a relationship with the land and with places, and how
Mm.
that fosters mental health, and how that really helps me to see myself both as a therapist but as a person in new and powerful ways.
Mm. Absolutely. And so could you give some examples? You've talked about how the therapy will often be you're walking along with someone outside and doing therapy in that context. Are there other techniques or ways that eco psychology influence what therapy looks like that are different maybe than what a conventional psychotherapist would offer?
Yeah. So I would say the biggest um, aspect of eco therapy or eco psychology is having nature as an attachment an attachment figure,
Hmm.
basically. So being able to help to foster this connection with clients that's not just between the therapist and the client, but it's also between the client and nature.
Hmm.
And so there's so many different ways of fostering that connection, like thinking of doing parts work from internal family systems, or some of the Gestalt techniques, being able to have different aspects of the client um, represented by parts in nature, and like the stand-ins of having this deep conversation with your parent, but it's a tree, and so they're
Hmm.
able to like play out some of these relational dynamics that they feel, and um, just even the process of externalizing these internal conflicts in a way that is less intimidating than if you're doing it with a family member or with a relationship that has a lot of conflict in it.
Hmm.
And um, so there's so many different ways of partnering with nature in the therapy process. And, even things like art therapy, like being able to create these um, pieces of nature, being able to take like pine cones or flowers or um, grass and make an art piece,
Hmm.
and doing it in a way that's sustainable and isn't harmful to the land that you're in. So it's cool because there's so many ways of being creative
Hmm. Hmm.
when you're outside, like
Hmm.
being a little kid when all of nature is our playground.
Yeah. Absolutely. I know personally for me I've often experience nature as an adult, and that childlike part of me, that creative part of me, that part of me that just wants to have fun really comes out. That playground piece, it's just I've there's been so many times when I've gone into the outdoors and it's just like an adult playground.
Yeah. Oh man, and how powerful is it to be able to tap into more playful aspects of ourselves as adults?
Mm, mm, absolutely. And for our listeners, maybe some people haven't had a ton of experiences outside. Maybe some people
Mm-hmm.
are kind of intimidated to go outside, uh, wildlife or for whatever reason. What are some, maybe like for someone living in a more suburban or like city area, what are some ways that folks in that setting can like still connect with the natural world?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of my favorite ways have been just having a little bit of dirt and like a pot, and planting seeds with clients, and
Hmm.
being able to watch and nurture new life
Hmm.
in that way has been really powerful. But even like the little spurts of grass that grow between the cracks in the sidewalk or
Hmm.
the trees outside your office, like there's so many ways of beginning to build a connection with nature,
Hmm.
and being able to witness um, the power of the seasons and how life goes through these different seasons, and the beauty and the gifts that there are within each season.
Hmm.
I think it's really powerful to provide context for our lives, and um, especially for, like we're in really difficult times right now, and being able to see how the trees respond and recover after a storm or a fire
Hmm.
can be really powerful to remind us of our own resilience and
Hmm.
ability to move through difficult times and to make it to the other side.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of my friends and I were actually talking recently, and he was talking about how he has been approaching the natural world with a learner's mind, and so I was inspired by him, and I was camping, and I woke up like just as the sun was rising, and it was super cold, and the sun just starts to come up, and then it just slowly starts to hit the area around me, and then hits me in the face, and just that warmth, being so cold.
Yeah.
That is the coldest time of the day, and then feeling that sunshine. It was just such a like simple experience, but with that learning perspective for me personally, it was like, this is so true. The problems in my life, the psychological problems that I've dealt with, there's always the sunrise. Whenever there's darkness, the sun will always rise. So yeah, I'm really drawn to what you're saying. It seems like there's so many lessons that we can learn from nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it really just takes that ability to be curious and then being able to slow down so we can notice.
So you've talked about connecting with our bodies amidst overwhelm, whether that's personal overwhelm or right now, there's so many things happening in our society that can create a lot of overwhelm. Will you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's many different um, ways of connecting with our bodies, and absolutely like taking into account the fact that people who have experienced trauma or people who have had really overwhelming experiences, like connecting with our bodies may not always feel the safest. Um, but being able to tap into like the five senses to like ground and to
Mm.
feel more centered and to feel less overwhelmed by swirling anxious thoughts, to be able to drop into like feeling the breath moving through your lungs or moving through your chest, or what it feels like when your seat is connected with your chair, your feet are planted on the ground, and
Mm.
um, really those aspects of mindfulness, of bringing us into what's happening in the here and now, can really support us in being able to accept what's happening in the here and now, and then accept what's happening in the next moment, and kind of build these little moments of okayness, um, and string them together.
Mm. Absolutely. And so you've talked. I was reading on your bio that you've used the eco psychology, ecotherapy to help people who are in the grieving process. Will you expand
Mm-hmm.
on that?
Yeah. Um, with grief, um, it's so complex and varied for each person who goes through the journey. And one of one of the powerful things about ecotherapy is being able to meet people exactly where they're at. And so I did an activity with a client, and it was, writing. I made seed paper, so like took bills and other random bits of paper and like made pulp and then pressed it into a mold and put seeds on it. And so we took some of that seed paper and planted it with an intention and a way of honoring the person that they had lost. And they were able to like nurture new life and really tap into the aspects of death and rebirth and the cycle of life, basically. But I like have seen how winter, for instance, can in the fall can speak so much to us about like death and grieving and letting go and what that process is like, and to be able to have that external support of nature being so much bigger than we are, as a container to hold all of these feelings that can feel so overwhelming and so dark sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been reading Die Wise by Stephen Jenkinson, and he talks about how our culture is just so death phobic too, and so we're often so out of touch with death. And then when we face death in life, we're often just kind of blindsided by it because we've not really embraced that part of our existence.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly in American culture, we don't have a lot of rituals or like thresholds for things like death, or even, like certain aspects of life that would be supported by like a ritual or some sort of practice that everybody goes through. And other cultures do have those, and seeing the ways that those can kind of help support these transitions that we have. So that's like another really important aspect that I feel like the eco-psychology field really does incorporate, is like, how do you create thresholds and how do you create these holding spaces to help people make transition and to mark transition.
Yeah, I'm curious, what are some of the ways that people have marked those transitions, created rituals for themselves?
One of the, I think, common ways that I've seen is particularly in grief, like letter writing, and if there's some unresolved conflicts or tensions, there's always the option of burning the letter, incorporating like the different elements like fire, water, air, earth into the practices that we're doing, as a way to mark that transition. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else. Just the intention and the decision to be conscious about what we're doing can just be really powerful. Of like, I'm going to make this special, so I'll light a candle. And that's what feels meaningful for the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I know for me personally, my grandma passed away a couple years ago, and my I was grieving that loss, and her death kind of came out of the blue, and it was a surprise. And one of my housemates at the time, she came up to me and like gave me a candle, and she was just like, "Hey, if you want to light this in honor of your grandma, here it is." And I really appreciated that gesture from her. And then I lighted it, and it was a really powerful experience for me. And since then, I've continued to keep that as a ritual uh, in my life when I want to remember her. Whenever I see a candle, I'm reminded of her life, and it's I completely hear what you're saying too. There's just not many rituals in our society, that are supportive of grief and supportive of life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really beautiful way of remembering your grandma and to honor her. Um, and yeah, we definitely don't have lots of ways of doing that, that were passed down from our families. And so
Mm,
being really intentional of creating those rituals um, can be like a really awesome part of the therapeutic process.
mm, absolutely. So you've also talked about finding safety internally, um, and will you talk more about what that looks like for people, what that process can look like?
Yeah. So I am trained in EMDR, um, and I also really take, a somatic kind of embodied approach to therapy as well. And so being able to identify, um, like moving kind of from the head into the body, but being able to identify like a safe place or like a resource within the body or around the body. Um, and so I try and do that with every client, like creating a container where they can store um, thoughts or feelings or just distress. Um, and that could be just something in their imagination. So my container is a treasure chest at the bottom of the ocean.
Hmm.
And then from there, I kind of just tune into my body, like feel someplace that could be in my left elbow or it could be in my right knee that feels like safe or warm or comforting.
Hmm.
And I just imagine myself just chilling in that spot in my body and really like tuning into my breath and accessing um, different parts of me that can provide support that I need for the moment.
Hmm. And does that tend to change from moment to moment, which body part, or in your experience and maybe people who have consulted you's experience, is it generally like one part of the body that they generally go back to, and that brings that safety?
Um, I like both. I've seen both. Like sometimes it needs to change depending on what's going on. And sometimes people find comfort like in the same spot within their body. Um, and, like the goal is to expand that safe space until like more and more of the body feels resourced, like the distress levels is down, but also the window of tolerance for sensations is expanded over time as you kind of practice, like the
Absolutely.
building the capacity for
Hmm.
mindfulness and paying attention.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's such a practice, isn't it? It's uh, yeah, just a daily, there's so, it seems like there's so many great tools out there for mindfulness practices, guided meditations, and all of that can be so helpful in contending with the busyness, the overwhelm, the anxiety that is just pervasive
Mm-hmm.
in our society.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many great tools out there.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything else that we haven't touched on in terms of ecopsychology or mindfulness, somatic work that you think that you'd like to share?
Let me check my notes. Um, so I think just one more piece about kind of the power of building the nature connection. I think especially now when the social fabric of our society is really being tested, but being able to go outside and to see yourself mirrored in nature, to see aspects of you that maybe you've hidden or aspects that are harder to look at. Nature can be a really awesome resource to support you in that. And yeah, I just really encourage people, maybe grab one friend for social distancing, but to go outside and to really allow yourself to be supported by something bigger than you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for that message. I know it's always a great reminder for me. I just can't seem to have enough time outdoors, and every time I'm outdoors, it serves me so much. So thanks for that message. And then, so the last question I generally ask our guests is, what's a message of hope that you'd like to leave the listeners with?
The message of hope. I'm really leaning into the parts of me that are eternal, and the parts of me that is grounded and centered. And I really encourage people, to do the work to to uncover the parts of you that are eternal and grounded and can support you no matter what's going on. Because we all have the resources that we need, and we all have the support that we need in order to make it through. And it doesn't always feel like it.
Yeah.
But, like, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to look to your community and your neighbors and to ask for help when you need it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a powerful message. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. I've really taken a lot from this conversation, and I'm sure our listeners will too. If people want to get in touch with you, where would be the best place to direct them?
Direct them to my website. So that's gracespringscounseling.com. And I'm also on Instagram at Lauren H. Scott, and I have a Facebook page as well.
Perfect. And is the Facebook page Lauren H. Scott as well? We'll find you there.
Oh, it's Grace Springs Counseling.
Grace Springs Counseling. Okay, perfect. Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Lauren.
All right. Thank you.
Please press the subscribe button, as well as rating and reviewing our podcast. This helps others connect with what you've been hearing. If you have any questions, please contact us at themindofatherapist@gmail.com. These questions will be kept anonymous. I want to thank Eric Price for the wonderful music you hear in this podcast. Additionally, this podcast was created to provide accurate and authoritative information on the subject matter. Although we are interviewing licensed therapists, they are not your therapists. This podcast is not intended to serve as direct medical advice and should not be used as a substitute for direct professional help. It is given with understanding that neither the host, publisher, guests, or PCS are rendering legal, clinical, or other professional information. If you need a professional, we encourage you to find one. Visit Psychology today to connect with a licensed clinician near you.